going to be archiving the webinar, all of the webinars, and we will make them available and email you once those webinars are available for listening in. Today we have Catherine McLaughlin, who is a national expert and trains individuals, staff, and parents on sexuality and developmental disabilities. She teaches sexuality education to people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities, as well as trains them to be peer sexuality educators themselves. Catherine is the author of an agency and school curriculum, Sexuality Education for People with Developmental Disabilities, and has developed 2 online courses, one to train professionals, Developmental Disability and Sexuality 101, and one for parents, Talking to Your Kids' Developmental Disabilities and Sexuality. Catherine has spent her career trying to elevate the status of all people, which is why the new name for her growing company is Elevatus Training. Catherine, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Oh, thank you. A little bit of housekeeping before I pass the presentation to Catherine. All the questions are going to be either in chat or question and answer box. Please hold them until the end of the presentation in about 45 minutes, and then we will be opening everything for question and answer. Otherwise, go ahead, Catherine.
Great, thank you. So glad that you're all here today. I'm in New Hampshire, and the snow is just starting to come down for another storm. I don't know where all of you are, but hopefully you're not in a snowstorm. I have, as Jasmina said, been teaching sexuality to people with developmental disabilities for over 25 years. And recently have been doing more work with Project Search. I was in New Mexico last month and did an all-day workshop for people with developmental disabilities, and half of the participants were from the local Project Search there. I'm also going to be starting to do a Project Search graduates workshop locally in Keene, New Hampshire. So I love Project Search and all that it does, and have been really happy with my work with Project Search. And I know that, you know, a lot of the issues, you know, you're probably on this webinar because there are lots of issues around sexuality for people with developmental disabilities, but also in a setting where they're in the workplace as well. So how do we help talk one-on-one with someone with a developmental
Catherine?
Yeah.
You are cutting in and out, so I don't know if you can bring in your speaker, your microphone a little bit closer to you, or just make sure that everything is plugged in, because it's kind of getting distorted.
Okay. I just unplugged one thing. Maybe that will help. How does it sound now?
It's sounding better.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thanks for letting us know. Yeah. So we'll move along then. One of the things that I've done with my work and with developing the curriculum is I've worked with a lot of people with developmental disabilities and asked them, why do you need and want to learn about sexuality? And this is what many of the self-advocates said. So we can learn to have healthy relationships, so we aren't lonely, so we're able to make informed choices, so we can pick the right person, or help with the toughest part of the relationship, making it last, so we can be safe, because we all have desires and needs, and that's okay, so that people know their rights, so that we can be sexual self-advocates and not just self-advocates. And many people have told me, self-advocates, that when they talk about getting involved in Project Search to become an intern, or they want to get an apartment and live on their own, they get a lot of support around that choice and that dream for them. But when we talk about sexuality or relationships or dating, they feel like they don't get that same support. So my work has really been trying to help people who work with people with disabilities to be more comfortable and confident in teaching this and talking about this. And the other
Catherine,
thing is that, yes.
I'm sorry, you're still going in and out. I wonder if it would be better if you called on your phone, or I don't know if there's any other ways to improve the audio.
Okay. Let me see. Where would I get the phone number to call in?
I will, if you go to, there's a little, on the bottom of the page, there's a little phone icon, and then you can go, you will say, I will call in, or it can call you. So you can do that.
I don't see a phone icon on the bottom.
All righty, let's see.
Audio connection, maybe? I can try that. Okay. You know what? Let me see if I can turn up
audio. Yes, select audio connection, and then it can call you. You just press and you just input your phone number. It's going to call you, and then ask you to enter the access code and attend the ID.
Okay. There's a couple things in the chat. I'm not having any problem hearing her, and the sound is good for me. So I'm not sure. I just changed my output and microphone to the highest setting.
Okay.
How does it sound now?
It's sounding better. Okay. If no one, I received a chat from someone. It was still cutting in and out, and it was cutting in and out for me too. So that's why. But it sounds like it's better.
Okay. Well, if it isn't, interrupt me, and I'll call in.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we were talking about what is sexual self-advocacy, and Green Mountain Self-Advocates designed a pamphlet, actually, on what is sexual self-advocacy, but here are some of the pieces of what that means. So speaking up for yourself sexually, getting information, taking a stand, saying to whomever, this is my choice, stating your sexual limits and desires with your partner, respecting others' limits and desires, starting to do what you want with relationships. And, you know, in general, we believe that most people, we're not talking about people with disabilities, but most people will eventually be in some kind of sexual romantic relationship. And there might be some disagreement about when that should start between parents and kids and all that, but we do have this assumption that eventually that will happen. But for people with disabilities, it's often the assumption that they won't, and that sometimes being a sexual self-advocate is also speaking up for the right to be in relationships and learn about sexuality. So what we're going to cover in the next hour or so is we're going to talk about some of the issues around why it's kind of difficult to talk about this topic. And I'm going to focus on a couple of tools that might be helpful for you. One is looking at our own values and figuring out how to manage those values, because as we're talking about sexuality, one of the important skills is to know our values. And given that we're in a culture that doesn't really talk about this, we don't have a lot of skills often to talk about this topic. So we often rely on our values. And we're going to talk about what those are and how you can set those aside so you're not imposing those. And then we're also going to talk about a couple different tools you can use in talking about this topic. And as I mentioned before, my hope is to help others be comfortable talking about this topic. And I do a 3-day training that I'll tell you about in the end that is all about training people from different agencies to become the sexuality educator trainer for their agency, meaning they would lead sexuality education classes, train staff, and work with parents and lead parent workshops. But in general, talking one-on-one, these are sort of the skills that are important to have in this slide where it says, I got this. So this person here has all of these skills and feels really confident talking about sexuality. So where we're going to focus is on the values piece and the skills for communicating about sexuality. All right, and when we sexuality, as I'm sure you are well aware, sometimes people immediately think of sex when they hear sexuality, and that is a piece of it, but that's not all of it. And so I want to make sure, you know, we're talking about a broad definition. Sexuality is more than intercourse or sex. It's about intimacy, connection, and belonging. It's about relationships, both friendships and sexual relationships. It's about how we feel about being the gender that we are and our sexual orientation, and also just how we feel about ourselves and others and our bodies, and it's really the total of who we are, what we believe, what we feel, and how we respond. So it's a big part of who we are and in our world and in our lives. So when we're thinking about sexuality, I'm going to have you all in the chat box. What you want to do is send to all participants, so you don't have to send privately to me. Just, I don't know if you can see, there's different settings you can put it on, but if you put it on all participants, then we can see what people write as far as the primary message that you personally received growing up about sexuality. And it could be a verbal message like, keep the aspirin between your knees, or whatever those kind of messages are, or even just a nonverbal message. So if you could, in the chat box, send to all participants, what are some of the messages you received growing up about sexuality? And I'll give you a couple minutes. Okay, so I see a couple, but it looks like it went to all panelists versus everyone. So let me read these. My grandmother sent me money in college and told me to keep my legs closed. It's private and personal. That it's not based solely on gender, sex, race, or religion. Don't have sex until you're married. Sexuality is concrete, inflexible, private, and not talked about. Waiting to be sexual with the person you'll marry. For parents to be ladylike, save sex for marriage. From the media, sexual freedom, no boundaries. Sex is okay, just be ready for the responsibility. If it's not to be talked about, you don't really talk about it. You need to graduate from college before having a baby. Sex is for procreation. It was not talked about. Sex is embarrassing. Don't talk about it. My mother said it's private, not an issue to discuss. Sex is for marriage. Figure it out. So great examples of the different kinds of messages that we get growing up about sexuality. And our culture often sends negative messages, and somebody just put very taboo. And that, you know, we often think of it as really the negative messages that we get. But sometimes when I'm doing a workshop, I'll ask people to raise their hand if they felt like they got positive messages about sexuality. And usually I get a handful of people. And 20 years ago, I'd get no one or maybe one person. So we're making some progress. But even just that piece about noticing whether you're giving negative messages to someone that you're working with makes a big difference. Even if you don't have the answers, just saying, great question, you know, and giving messages that you deserve to get this information, and that it isn't something to be embarrassed about or feel shame about. So what about people with developmental disabilities? What kind of messages do you think they get around sexuality? And you can put them in the chat box again. Oh, you don't see the all participants option. I'm not sure. I have it on mine, so maybe I can just read them off so you can put them on there. Yeah, it looks like, so some of the messages, sex isn't for you. How do I find a partner? Oh, you have to hit and then drop down box, it sounds like. There's no conversations. some of the same as us. People with disabilities should not be able to. Nothing. I had a parent who said that her child had no idea about sex and was 18. Parents think young adults with disabilities do not have feelings, that they're not sexual, they're too vulnerable, and do not have the intellectual means to properly consent. Sadly, I think the message they get is you can't do that because you can't understand it. Stay away from it. It's not appropriate. I've had parents tell me their child won't be able to be in a relationship. They can't do that. It was an IEP where it was a transition goal. So there's a more positive message, and it's not appropriate for you to feel that way. People with questions. Had a school superintendent ask me if I thought hiring a prostitute would help. I think people assume they do not have the same questions and desires that are taught unless a parent consents for them to get into the program. Parents are afraid their child with IDD will be taken advantage of. Absolutely. So there's a lot of really strong messages. Like, we got negative messages, but people with developmental disabilities get even stronger messages, like you're going to be taken advantage of, you're going to be abused, this isn't for you. And I often tell the story about a self-advocate who out in Minnesota told me that when she was in high school, she was in the mainstream health class and was learning about nutrition and physical activity, and was removed from the classroom during the sexuality unit. So there's a message right there. You don't need this. This isn't for you. Yeah. So often, also, people with disabilities say that they get very similar messages, like you're not a sexual being, you shouldn't have sex, you're innocent and childlike and need protection from sexuality. So similar to some of the things you've said, you're not responsible, you can't solve problems, unable to make good decisions, always makes mistakes, would not make good parents, so should not have children. And they also notice that they get different messages than their non-disabled siblings. So they're very aware of the different kinds of messages that they're getting. And then somebody just wrote that it's a reason some parents are going for guardianship, so they can try to, I'm guessing, potentially control this aspect of their life and not be able to. Oh, I'm cutting in and out again, it sounds like. I don't know what to tell you. Should I call in?
I feel like that people who have called in on the phone are having difficulty hearing you versus people that are using their computer. It seems like there's a sort of a split between that. So I'm not sure. So yeah, okay. So some people are saying, yep, I'm on my computer and I can hear you well. So I think it could be just a connection on our phone.
Okay, okay. All right. All right, so that seems to be the theme. Yes, that if you're on the computer, there's no problem, but if you're on the phone, it's cutting in and out. So not sure if you can use a computer. That seems like that would be a better option. So I'm going to just tell you about some values situations. So like I mentioned, we often, we want to give positive messages about sexuality. And we also want to, be clear about what our own values are so that they don't ooze out of our mouths and we share them with everyone. So what I'm going to show you on the next slide is a bunch of scenarios. And the point of this is just to get clear about your values. And given that this is a webinar, it's really hard to break you into small groups and have you talk about this, but I'm going to just have you think about this, and we'll talk about what might happen if we do share values as well. So on the next slide, you can see that there's a list of different scenarios. I can't read the top one because it seems to be covered, but I think it's a 16-year-old. Is it okay for a 16-year-old to have sexual intercourse? Is it okay for a woman to have many partners? Is it okay for a man to have many partners? Is it okay for a woman to have 3 abortions? Is it okay for 2 men to be in a romantic relationship and have sex? Is it okay for 2 women? in a romantic relationship and have sex? Is it okay when two people who are not in love decide to have sex? Is it okay for two people with disabilities to have a child? So what I want you to do is just think about which ones you're okay with and which ones you're not okay with. And there's nothing wrong with having values. We all have them, especially around sexuality. But the issue is, in a professional role, we don't want to share those values. As a parent, go for it. Share whatever you believe about all of these scenarios. But as a professional, we need to just acknowledge our values and set them aside. So let's, just for a second, if you can think about, which ones are hardest for you and why, and if the person did have a disability, would you feel different or not? Like, most of the scenarios are it's not specific to disability, just the last one. So if those other ones had disability, would that make a difference for you and why? So maybe just a few people, if you're willing to put that in the chat box, just your sort of reaction to some of these values. And I can go back to them as well. Someone said, I'm okay with all of them. There wasn't one that was difficult, somebody said. I'm generally pro-choice, but 3 abortions seems excessive unless it's for medical reasons. Only one gave me pause. I'm good to see and hear all sides. I do not see that those disabilities as different. Yeah, all are okay, but my discussion will be centered around the concept of consent and how important that is. Current society has made it okay for 16-year-old children to have sex. As parents, it's very difficult to control. I do not think I would change my mind for people with disabilities. All are hard. I would be okay with all of them. I would want to chat about being safe sexually. Yeah, so there's a wide range. And people are saying, I found myself thinking that it depends on the disability, like the last one. So sure, you could say yes, but, and then someone said they felt bad about that. Yeah, so I think it's just being aware of our different values, and it's okay to have them. It's okay to have any kind of reaction to these, whether you're okay with all of them or one of them. But what's important is to not share those values. And so what people are talking about is, I'm okay with them, but I want to have some conversations to help the person be safe and not have some of the negative consequences of being sexual impact a person. So just think about that a little bit more. And then this other piece is like, well, what could happen if you told someone one of your values? Like, you're working in I'm using Project Search as the example. I'm not sure if you're all from that organization, but let's say you told someone you shouldn't have sex until you're older. How could that impact your relationship with that person? I'll let you put some in the chat box again. Could make them feel shame and judged. Absolutely, right? Whenever someone imposes their values on any of us, we feel shame and judged. The student could hide information about the relationships and feel ashamed, lack of trust in the person. If I disagree, it could become something to hide. So yeah, if they disagree with what you're saying, your values could be perceived as wrong, you could be judged. They may stop being honest with you, unheard, not seen, right? People feel like you can't trust you, losing trust. Great, yes. Loss of honesty in the relationship. So yeah, telling somebody what to do, big impact. And someone said it would probably influence them to a greater degree than anticipated. So you should choose your words carefully. Absolutely. It could go against parents' values. They become withdrawn. Yeah, so we don't want to share those values. It's okay to have values, especially around, sexuality. We all have them, but just not to impose them. And sometimes parents might be nervous about you talking about sexuality. You can say that you don't share values, that's their job as the parent to share values, and you help people explore their own values and what they think. So the other thing that I want to add is sort of the difference between what is a value and what is a fact. And I tell the story of my daughter when she was on the playground and she was 6 years old. A little girl said to her, "You have to be married to make a baby." And my daughter said, "No, you don't. You don't have to be married." And to me, that was an example of the first girl was saying a value, and my daughter was saying a fact. And that we just want to make sure that we are saying things that are true and proven and established through observation and measurement. So that one scenario about two people being in love or not, that's one that many people find that they find themselves starting to say, well, when you're in love, that kind of thing. So just notice if you are putting in any values in your conversations. And then I also say that, we do share some values, but they're more around, they're called common values. So if I had asked everyone, do you think it's important to respect others by treating them well and listening to them? Everyone would say, absolutely. I can't imagine anyone would go against that. So values around respect and consent and equality, those are ones that we do share because those are important values that everyone would agree with, right? So that's just another piece. You can say the only values that you do share are more like common values, like you should be able to be in a relationship without violence. It's also a law, too. Consent is a law as well as a value. So so that's the piece on values. So just sort of learning how to set them aside. And is there anything that you do to not impose your values that helps you set them aside? If you could put something in the chat box, what do you do if you're faced with something and you can feel your values about to come out of your mouth? What do you do to stop that? Do more listening than talking. Tell the intern that this is something they need to discuss with their parents. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So I tell them they should probably talk to their parents. Try and remember it's not your decision, it's their decision and not ours. Yeah. List facts and then have the individuals reflect on their opinions. Just ask more questions about why they feel that way. Absolutely. I listen and call the parents to discuss. I talk about other sides with information, not values. Parents are better to answer these questions, provide facts, listen, encourage to talk. Always try to speak with parents or a trusted person first. Yeah, so you're telling them, great question. This might be something that you want to talk to your parents about, or someone, a professional, another professional about this issue. Yeah, so we're giving it back to them and also helping them figure out who they could talk to. And not all parents want to talk about this, which is what is true. And so who is another adult that you could talk to as well? Somebody said it's very difficult because the interns are adults, so we have to respect them as adults. They may not want their parents to know. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. So I think that's probably a policy issue around whether you notify parents about things or not. But yeah, I think we do want to respect them as adults. And actually, it seems to me, someone said consider guardianship when speaking with parents. I think that's probably a smart thing, and that lots of people do that in different agencies where if they have guardianship, they're more likely to let parents know than if they don't have then they're not the guardian of the child. But yeah, I mean, we want people to become sexual advocates. So how do we support that and help them sort out their thoughts and values as well? All right, so here are just a few tips. Someone said also depending on the kind of guardianship and probably your state laws around guardianship. Right, so you want to find that out as well. So we're just going to talk about some tips for talking. We've got about 15 more minutes, and then we'll open it up for any questions that you might have. So let's start with some tips. The first thing is to give positive messages, which we already talked about, around sexuality, like it's okay to talk about this. It's a normal, healthy conversation to have. You also want to use inclusive language, so we want to be sure to think about that not everybody is heterosexual, that people might be gay or lesbian or bisexual. So we want to say things like partner or sweetheart so that we don't attach a gender to it, so to not assume heterosexuality. You also don't have to know the answers too, like it's okay to say, I'm not sure, or I'll get back to you. It's okay to feel embarrassed because, you know, many of us didn't have role models for this, or maybe, you know, a lot of people said the messages they got was something you don't talk about. It's all right to answer later, so if a question comes to you and you could say, geez, I don't know, but let's find out, and you can find out and get back to them. You're going to get facts and a range of opinions, and that, you know, that, like people were saying, I get facts, I ask questions, so that's really what we want to do, is give things that are factual, and then sometimes I'll say, some people think this, other people think this, what do you think? So you can give that range and they can say what they think. We want to be concrete and graphic, use repetition, and also use the media as a way to teach as well. So there was, you know, you can watch a soap opera or a movie and talk about relationships. So when I train people with developmental disabilities to be peer sexuality educators, I train them that there's different types of questions that you'll get. Some are factual and how-to types of questions, and we give facts. There's also values questions, like should I have sex, or an opinion, like what contraception should I use, or even personal questions. When did you start having sex? Did you have sex last night, right? So there's different ways to respond to these different types of questions. So for the first one, this is a great format that I use, and people use it with their own children too. It's just a good way to sort of assess what the question is, what might be going on for the person. So the first thing is we want to reassure the person that it's a good question to ask. So they ask a question about sexuality and relationships, and you say, wow, that's a really great question. You find out what the person thinks or is really asking. So this is that piece of, well, what do you think? Or where did you hear that word? Or trying to kind of get more of where did this question come from? And there's also, you've probably heard me, if you've heard me speak before, tell that joke about the kid who said to his mom where to come from, and the mom did this whole thing about the sperm and the egg. And then at the end, the kid said, oh, that's funny because Susie's from Chicago. And so we really want to know, like, well, what do you think? And then they might say, well, I think I'm from Los Angeles. That's right, you're from Los Angeles. So you want to just make sure you've got the right question. And then you decide what messages you want to give. And I think that's the place where we can add in positive things, like it's normal for this to happen. You know, anything that might reassure someone, it's okay to talk about this, it's a dirty topic, or nothing to be ashamed about. And then we're going to answer the question simply. We're going to use medical terminology. So not only are we using facts, but we use medical terminology. And we encourage the person to give feedback. And a big piece, which I know you're very aware of, is the issue around sexual abuse. And as far as knowing what the body parts are is really important because it normalizes the body part. But also, if somebody has been abused, they can articulate what happened by using medical terminology. I also think that if you have terminology like that, you appear less vulnerable as well. So if somebody was, saying something about, trying to get someone to touch their sexual part or something, and the person said, "I'm not going to touch your penis or your vulva," then it makes them seem like they're educated and less vulnerable. So having those words are important. I want to encourage the person to give you feedback too. So this is used, like, for example, with this one, like, what is a boner? This is the question I always make people practice in my workshops. So we want to be concrete, right? We want to really just say what it is. So the penis gets hard and sticks out away from the body. But not only do we want to answer this question with facts, but we also want to think about different aspects of this question. So we've got physical aspect, what is it? I just did that piece. Social aspects of questions, so it could be about privacy, responsibility, laws, or emotional feelings that might be connected to it. So we might say something like a boner is a nickname for an erection, and an erection is when the penis gets hard. It's something that we want to keep private, and you should have them in private, but if you have them in public, sometimes it can be uncomfortable, or people might be uncomfortable if they see it. So you have to figure out what to do about that. And can you leave? Can you hide it when you're in a public place? So it just broadens our answer to these questions. All right, so I'm just going to keep going through this, and then in about 7 minutes, we're going to do some questions. So here's just another example. What is a condom? A rubber sock that covers a penis. Using a condom is private. It protects you and your partner. Many people feel good when they use them because they're being responsible and don't have to worry. So there's sort of another example of broadening the answer to the question. And this is the one I already talked about. And then, how are babies made? And again, we can make it really simple, or we can also talk about public and private. And a lot of our responses are going to involve public and private, and especially when you're talking about healthy work boundaries, any place at work is public. Even the bathroom is going to be public because lots of people use it. So we want to talk a lot about public and private. So here's just an example. When a sperm and egg meet, sperm comes from the testicles, or a person with testicles, the egg comes from ovaries. There are many ways to get a sperm and egg together, but usually it's from vaginal sex. The penis goes in the vagina. This is something that you need to do in private. All right, so just a couple more questions. So should I have sex with my boyfriend? And we all kind of said, you already gave some great ideas around giving facts. But different people have different sayings about this, like how do you just sort of stop what you're thinking and give it back to the person? Like, well, what do you think? What would you need to be ready for this? How would you know you were ready? Also even finding out, well, what do you mean by sex? Because sometimes people will say sex and think that it means kissing. So, well, when you say sex, what do you mean by that? So making sure you've got the right question. Too. If we want to give it back to them, it's for them to decide. And then, did you have sex last night is a personal question, obviously. So we want to say, that's a personal question, so I'm not going to answer that. But I will often say, but sometimes when people ask questions like that, what they really want to know is how often do people have sex? So you can say, it's really different for everyone. Sometimes it's once or twice a day. Sometimes it's once a week. Sometimes it's once a month. It's not at all. It just depends on the person. So you kind of get it off of you, but also keep the conversation going. And then the last tool, and we've got just a few more minutes, and I want to open it up for questions, is responding to sexual behaviors. And I know a lot of people have told me that they're, when they're working with interns, there are different behaviors that they have to kind of address and respond to. So sometimes we might ignore them, but if we decide we can't ignore it, then what we want to do is name the behavior or comment to the person as you see it or hear it, praise if appropriate. So you want to name it. Like, I see you're hugging everyone in the cafeteria at work, or I see that you are asking your all of your coworkers for their phone numbers, or whatever the behavior might be. And then we want to find out the meaning behind the behavior. So why are they doing this, right? So it could be lots of different things, like, well, they don't realize that not everyone is a potential partner. And so you might have to teach, well, who is it okay to be in a relationship with and who isn't it? And that at work, we're not going to ask people out. So you want to find out the meaning, decide what message you want to give. You want to give them positively, responding simply, and then encourage the person to give you feedback. So similar to the answering questions, but you're just naming the behavior and trying to figure out what it is that's causing the behavior. So here are just a few other things to consider. I'm just going to give you these last few things. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with David Hingsberger, but he's a sexuality educator from Canada. He works with people with developmental disabilities, and he's done a lot of great work. And he talks about the different things that might be causing the behavior. So is it something in the structure? Is the person hugging everyone because every time they come in, people are hugging them? So it might be something going on in the environment or the structure. Is it being modeled by anyone? So asking yourself those questions. Is it because they have no other options for partners? So they're asking everyone out at work because they don't have any social outlets to meet people, and so their partner selection is really limited. Is it because they don't really know the steps to courting someone? You know, that you start off getting to know them as a friend, and then maybe you flirt a little, and then you might ask for their number. You know, that it's a process. We don't just go right up and ask for people's phone numbers. So how do you court someone and get to know someone? Sexual knowledge is another piece. Like, do they have knowledge about the difference between public and private? Do they have knowledge about how you ask somebody on a date? What is their sexual knowledge? And like I mentioned earlier, people are taken out of sexuality education classes. So sometimes it's really just a lack of knowledge. What's their learning history? You know, what did they learn growing up? Did they get really negative messages at home? And so they are doing things based on those messages and sort of having to unlearn some of that history. Dave also talks about perpetual arousal. So sometimes you might have had these situations where one of the interns is in the public bathroom masturbating or something like that, or touching their sexual parts. One of the things is that they may not know how to masturbate, and so Dave Hingsberger designed these videos on masturbation for both men and women, and it teaches people. They watch it on their own. It's not something that you would watch with them. They'd watch on their own. Parents have asked me about this before, so it's a great resource that's out there. Is the behavior because of something medical? You know, are they touching their sexual parts because it itches? Is it something to do with any kind of medication that they're on? And then lastly, is it because no one has told them that it's okay? You know, have they gotten lots of messages like, oh, it doesn't mean anything, it's fine, versus no, you know, you have a certain reaction when a 20-year-old hugs you that you don't know without a disability. We should have the same reactions whether they have a disability or not, but sometimes you know, people sort of do a lot of forgiving, like, oh, they didn't mean it, and sort of that, you know, treating them like children. So those are just some other things to think about why they might be doing some sort of behavior. So I'd like to open it up and just see what kind of questions you have around this topic. So we have another 15 minutes, and I'll just take a couple minutes at the end to give you some information from me. But what questions do you have about talking about sexuality? Do you have information on discussing appropriate courting? Yeah, I do. And actually, Jasmina said that I could send some materials after. I could send you the handout on the steps to moving from friend to partner. So I'm happy to send that. Will you be able to have the handouts? Oh, to webinar, like the slides. Oh, that would be, I hope so. I think so. Jasmina? Will
yes,
the PowerPoint be?
Yes. If it's okay with you, Catherine, we wanted to put the PowerPoints on the website. They will be in PDF format, so they will be made available along with any other extra resources you want us to have. We can put everything on the website. Yes. There is one question that came to me privately. We have a student that came to us and told us she wants to be a man. So, Michelle, can you expand on the question? I don't see the question, Michelle. So if you can just ask the question.
Well, I can certainly talk about that. I think.
Oh, how to help her. Oh. She's asking how to help a student that wants to be, she wants to be a man.
Yep. Yeah, so I think I would say, thank you so much for telling me about this. And have you talked to anyone else about this? And I know that this is an issue for lots of people where they're starting to transition from one sex to the other. So, I think I would just support and listen to this person and see where they are in the process. Do they want to talk to, a counselor or something around that? Or maybe they already are, it's sort of assessing where they are in this process. And that there are lots of, I'll send you this article where they're seeing a lot more gender fluidity with people who have autism. And so the topic seems to be coming up more and more for people. And so the more comfortable we can be with it, the better. And, I'd be curious, like, do the parents have any sense of this? How would you work with the parents with this? So I think there's a lot there to talk about and find out what the next step might be. Let me see what else we have here. How would you approach a situation where you have an adult student with a disability and a much older coworker without a disability are wanting to pursue a relationship? Yeah, so I think, there are people with disabilities are allowed to be in a relationship without someone without a disability and vice versa. I think what we want to look at is what kind of a relationship do they have as far as, is there any kind of power dynamic difference there? And if there, it may not, and what are the laws around it in your state? It may not be, that might be more of a value for us. And I think that's really tricky for us as well, because if we feel like someone's getting taken advantage of, I wouldn't assume that that's the case. But just to talk about healthy relationships, what's important in relationships, and support the person. So if anything goes wrong, you're there for them. How do you get parents more on board? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. There's 3 questions that are coming through. They're very similar, and I'll read all 3 of them.
Okay, great.
I have an intern, hang on just a sec. I have an intern that is highly sexual. Her goal is to have a baby. She's indiscriminate. How do I work with her on this? And then there's another one that's similar. It says, I have an intern who feels like every guy who gives her any kind of attention likes her and wants to be her boyfriend. We've tried talking to her and it does not seem to help. Any other suggestions? Then one more. We have an intern who attaches herself to anyone of the opposite sex and will declare her love for them and immediately ask about having sex with them. If they even sit together in a room, she will text him and claim to be pregnant.
Wow.
They're a little bit similar, so.
Okay, yeah. So sort of that's, I think you said highly sexual, or anybody that they meet becomes their boyfriend, and how do we, and I think part of it is thinking about, well, what's the meaning behind the behavior, right? Like what is her history? Does she have a history of sexual abuse? We want to look at that. We want to think about, is it because she is really lonely and doesn't have the opportunity to meet people? Like, why are these behaviors happening? Does she need information on how you move from being a friend to someone to being in a relationship with somebody? So maybe it's around courting, but really, I mean, all of these scenarios sound like what's important is sexuality education for them around what's a healthy relationship, what is a relationship too, and when do you know you're in one as well. Hopefully that helps. Do you have info on what grooming is with people with disabilities? You know, it's interesting. I've just started recently hearing this word grooming. So you're talking about if somebody is going to perpetrate or take advantage of a person, what are the different, is there something different around grooming for people with disabilities? And I don't think so. I think they're very similar techniques to try to get someone to trust, to say things like, I'll give you money if you do this. I think it's very similar kinds of tactics to take advantage of someone. I'm kind of looking through, do you have any information on proper grooming? A little different, right? I think we're talking about hygiene and taking care of ourselves. And yeah, let me think about whether I have any, I might have something on hygiene that I can send you. When I teach my classes, I do between one class and the next, we talk about getting ready for a date, and so they dress up for the next class where they're, and we talk about how you clean for a date and all that. So that might be something as well, but I'll look and see. Do you have resources for individuals who are transgender that we could share with families? Yeah, I definitely do. Yeah, I think the Human Rights Campaign has some really good stuff. I just referred that to someone else as well, but I'll get you those resources. Let me just see if there's any other. If someone likes someone at work or on their internship, how would you approach this? You want the focus to be work, but lots of people of all abilities, like other people at work, and have allowances to talk about this. Should staff talk to interns about this if it comes up? Yeah, I think it's, I mean, this comes up a lot, that it's not different rules for someone with a disability compared to someone that doesn't have a disability. So I think, I think there's lots of people meet people at their place of employment. So yeah, I think we should talk about it and talk about, yes, we're really there to work, but maybe you could do something with someone outside of work. And also someone mentioned getting parents on board too. So I think one thing is to tell parents that, talking about sexuality is protection. right? It prevents unplanned pregnancy, sexually transmitted infection, and reduces somebody's risk of being sexually abused. I think that really speaks to parents too, that when we don't teach about it, lots of things can happen. And so when you have the education and the knowledge, you're less likely to have some of these negative consequences happening. I know that there are some young people who are sexting pictures of their sexual parts and then getting arrested and being thought of as a sexual offender. And so I think just the more we talk about what's going on in the culture and how to be safe in it, parents usually get on board. Also, if you have a parent that is very active and they're willing to sort of support some of this work too, talk to another parent about it. So I think that that would be the way to go. And also helping the person with the disability talk to their parents and say why they want to have this information. There was a story where a young woman wanted to take a sexuality education class and the mom was really against it, and then the staff person said, talk to your mom, tell your mom why you want to take this class. And so she went to her mom and said, Mom, I want to take this class because I want to fall in love. And the mom was like, oh, of course, you know, but when people first hear sexuality, they think we're talking about sex, like you're going to talk to my kid and tell them how to go out and have sex. And so letting them know that it's way more than that, and that the values piece is there, that's what they can contribute to this around when to have sex or not, that you don't give those kind of values. I'm just looking to see if there's any more questions. Is there some information about how organizations can follow the UN rules for the right of people with disabilities? Yeah, I don't know too much about that, but it might be something to look at and explore as an organization. You know, how, in what ways are we doing well with these rights? In what ways are we not? So I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for. Looking for a resource to handle a male intern who's very sexually charged. He will stare at ladies' breasts while talking to them, and redirection has not worked thus far. He only wants female interaction and is beginning to cross the lines into sexual harassment. Yeah. I guess my question is, he'll stare at breasts and redirection doesn't work. Does it work sometimes? I mean, I guess my question is, does he know what he's doing? And that you might want to bring in some law enforcement to talk about, you know, if you stare at somebody's breasts, they could feel threatened, and it could turn into, it could be crossing the line into sexual harassment. So I think, you know, having to know, it's hard to, you know, just hear the scenario and know the meaning behind the behavior, but what do you think the meaning is? And once you figure out what the meaning is, he knows what he's doing and will stop when it is caught, but will start again almost immediately. Yeah, I think that this is a big problem because he is, he knows what he's doing. And so if you could talk about, well, tell me why you're doing this. I want to meet people, I'm turned on, maybe it's perpetual arousal, and so he's constantly aroused. So I think, I don't know where the parents are in this and what kind of a relationship he has with them, but I'd want to know why this is going on, and talk to him about some of the, you know, the laws around it as well. Okay, discussing with my colleagues. Yeah, so it's 3 o'clock, so let me just thank you all. Those are great questions, and you know, this is sort of just the tip of the iceberg. But I want to tell you that if you want to receive my email, you can go to elevatustraining.com and you can sign up for my. Twice a month, I send out a newsletter with information about sexuality and disability. I'm also doing these 3-day certificate training programs, if that's of interest to you. So you'd learn more about how to train other staff I think somebody brought that up as well. And I'm in Atlanta and LA area, Colorado, and Minnesota this spring. And Jasmina also mentioned the online courses. So there's a lot on my website, but also my curriculum. There are definitely lessons that people could use in the either if you want to get into a lot of the sexuality information, but definitely relationships and decision making and communication. And so there's a lot of topics. If you go to my website, you can see a sample lesson in the table of contents and that kind of thing. And then lastly, my email. You know, if you have more questions following this webinar, you want to talk about something, email me. I'm happy to respond to them. And I think that's all. And thank you so much for attending the webinar.
Thank you so much, Catherine. We have reached the end of the webinar. We will share all of these great resources and also the website, Catherine's website, and the email as well. So you will get another email with all of this great information. As a reminder, join us on March 12th for the second webinar, Addressing Workplace Sexual Harassment, and I'm just sending you direct links to that information, so it's in the chat box. I will also send that out as well again. Thank you all. We have recorded the webinar. We'll make it available. Have a great rest of the day. Feel free to sign off, and hopefully we'll speak with you again next month. Thank you, and thank you so much, Catherine.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.